Ladies and gentlemen, it's time! We have completed Grime all the way to the end game, and I wanted to put my thoughts together in a full game review for you. As this, I would consider this a story game. There is actually some story elements and some discovery part to it. And that because of that, I'm going to be showing you only early game, opening minutes kind of gameplay. The gameplay gets a lot more complex. There's a lot of cool things to experience, but just to make sure that you don't watch a game review and get spoiled on that, the gameplay behind my voice is just going to be a very early game as you discover. So let's talk about my experience with Grime. It is a Metroidvania, Souls-like, kind of a popular category these days. And it actually is a little bit harder than most. They are pretty punishing with some of the mechanics you'll encounter. It does have locked animations. You'll be kind of swinging to avoid those basic abilities. So a lot of the platformers and Metroidvanias, there's definitely some aspects to that. There's areas where you find progression. You have to go get a new ability and then backtrack and then discover. And there's boss battles and basic combat. You have armor and weapons and stats and upgrades, very similar to more of a Souls-like or kind of action RPG element. So the basis of this game is you are a black hole for a head. You spawn out of you have no idea where, and you land down in this dirty, nasty, grimy place, and then you start progressing through in a RPG element. So let's talk about some of the things I liked, some things I didn't like, things that I might change if I had the chance, and what my overall review for the game is. First off, visuals, fan-freaking-tastic. You have to kind of take this for what it is. This isn't, the biggest studio, so they're not going to have like the craziest amount of budget, but I think for the budget and time spent for the project, they did phenomenally. This game looks great. It has a very consistent art style and visual aesthetic. On top of that, one of my favorite things about it is the environments. You can see it here on screen. I actually found myself pausing often to marvel at the environment, how it looked. It's kind of like this gritty, high specular presentation. I think it fits kind of the theme of the game and the name of the game very well. But overall, I think the game looked awesome. It just kind of visually, some of the animations you can kind of tell were not, they weren't, I think, on the same level, but I think it seemed like the animations were probably a little more cost efficient for what they did. They still looked great. They still kind of worked well, but it definitely wasn't to the same degree as the environment and some of the texturing and the modeling that I saw. I mean, the game looks really, really cool. It is a platformer. So gameplay wise, it's all two-dimensional Metroidvania. I think they landed on the platforming really well. There's actually a lot of sections in the game that are unique. You do, when you fall in this game, that you take fall damage. And you actually, if you fall a certain distance, you start to speed up like a meteor, and then you crash down into whatever's below you, and you die instantly. This had a few bugs where if you ever triggered this kind of like meteor fall after falling for a certain distance, there's nothing you could do to change your momentum. So if you dashed or paused yourself or tried to grapple or whatever, you would just kind of plummet down to the earth and die. And there's a couple times where it felt like that was a little unnatural, where you just kind of, you were about to dash and you dashed, and then you triggered the part where you fall like a rock and just die even though you're still dashing. So some of those were kind of weird, but the platforming sections were fun. There's a couple sections where you have to be airborne for a very long period of time, or you have to carry a platform over long distances, avoiding puzzles and obstacles and things like that. So from a platforming standpoint, also really good. I think they kind of hit that Metroidvania platforming experience right on the head. And I really enjoyed my time with that specific aspect. The universe and the characters and the VO, again, is kind of like, there's not a lot of voice acting in the game. It's more just kind of that, I would call, I guess, the Animal Crossing effect, where you just have kind of like a grunt or a noise, like that kind of thing, where you can hear the character and you can understand their voice and their, how they might speak, but it's not fully voiced. And I think from that standpoint, you still get a very charming and kind of warm, hilarious standpoint from the characters that you see. They do a lot with like wiggling text and moving text around on the screen to emphasize certain notes or certain words in a sentence, just to make it feel really unique and interesting. And I think from that, it worked really well. You meet some characters that are just kind of goofy, off the wall, but their personality really shines. And to be honest, it's hard to make personality shine when all you have is a vocal tone and text and minimal animation. So I think they did a great job bringing that to life as well. Some pretty cool things. And I think there's also, you know, if I think it was marketed as a Souls-like Metroidvania. I think that not all Metroidvanias are that hard. I think Hollow Knight had a lot of its difficulty, Shovel Knight for sure. And I think Ori was more just, you know, eye candied, but there were some difficult parts to it on 1 and 2. But for this game, they definitely had that kind of, you would encounter enemies that if you hadn't fought them already, you were more than likely going to die because their animations and attacks were so random and different and difficult that they're just going to cut you off guard. I died a lot more in this game than I do in most platformers, partially from the fall damage, partially from the difficulty of the enemies, and then everything in between. So there's definitely some difficulty spikes there. And they also committed to a pretty harsh map progression. So you actually go into a new area and you don't see anything. It's some Metroidvanias have this, but in order to find the map for that area, it's not quest based, it's not exploration based. You actually have to go into the dark area, find a beacon, which does have some notation towards it. It has like gleaming lights that point you towards the beacon in the direction. But until you find that beacon in that area will be completely dark. You will not have a map at all whatsoever. So pretty punishing from that standpoint. Kind of difficult to push through, but it didn't bother me too much. It didn't distract from the experience. I actually really enjoyed it. It felt good to finally find the beacon, and I got very excited when I saw a beacon coming along. So pretty cool stuff. The game all in all is about 12 to 14 hours, depending on how long you take to beat the bosses. There's a couple optional bosses, and there's even a challenge boss that was pretty freaky and kind of fun to fight, where it has dynamic attacks and it can change up its attack patterns and has, you know, a lot of different ways to attack you all at once, which felt really good. But what I will say is not every enemy had good hit telegraphing. I think in general, they did a good job of kind of lining up that animation lurch where the motion of the character kind of lurches back a little bit. And then when it starts moving forward, that's when you can parry and you can interact with it. Most of the enemies are pretty good on that. There's definitely some enemies that the hitboxes weren't lined up as well as they probably could have been. And you know, you get hit by it when you really aren't expecting to, or there's actually a good number of bugs that I encountered around enemies in general where they have, like most action games, there's a regular attack, which is parryable, and then there's a unblockable red attack. And so if you try to parry the unblockable, of course you get hit by it because it can't be parried or prevented. But they actually, I fought a couple enemies where sometimes, like half the time, they would trigger an unblockable that wouldn't glow red. Even though I could recognize it by the animation, but there was a bug where the red glow just wasn't triggering. So I kind of went in to go block it, realizing it was an unblockable that just was failing to show the red. And I actually encountered probably more than the usual amount of bugs in this game. You know, that's something that they can patch out, and I hope they do, because I don't want that to be a detractor for people that don't end up playing the game. I had issues where I would grapple onto a ladder, and then I would start glitching out, and it would launch me off the ladder and throw me to the ground, or I wouldn't be able to grab onto something, or, you know, in a platforming section, I had it several times where platforms that you step on and then inflate away and then grow back, they stopped growing back. So I had to like restart my game or kill myself and then just come back to the area and hope the platform would grow back. So there's definitely a bunch of points where it felt like I was being taken out of the game, or I had to restart because there were some just general issues. So, you know, fixing that would be nice. And there's one thing that I can nitpick on, is it may be minor depending on your play style, but the way they handle two characters having collision inside each other, to me, didn't feel like it was, it could have been a better solution. So it seemed like the way that it worked is that if you ever find yourself inside the collision of a boss or a monster or something, and that monster starts moving, it seemed to very aggressively correct your position outside of their collision, so you couldn't stack on top of a character. But this was so aggressive that oftentimes when fighting a boss, it would throw me into a pit or it would launch me into a wall just because I was near the boss. and I touched this collision, and all of a sudden I would get slid across the screen, and it felt a little unnatural for that. But otherwise, outside of that, when that didn't trigger, the combat felt good. I think it was just, it kind of fits into that Souls-like idea of, leveling up a specific weapon and having armor. And, there's a lot of really cool surprises in the game that really came at you fast and made you feel good about it. So when the game, if outside of the bugs, overall, I think the game felt really good. You would get hunt points by killing unique monsters like mini bosses. You could spend those on perks, and then you would level up just like you would in a Souls-like game. You get currency by killing enemies. You spend those on stats. The stats unlock weapons for you, and those weapons have stat scaling. So depending on what stat you decide to go with, then you'll get different scalings of different weapons. And there's actually a surprising number of weapons in this game, and they're all really interesting and unique. There's an axe that's a mouth that you can use as a heavy attack to bite and chomp down on people. They have a drill weapon. They have really big maces. They have scythes with really unique interactions. So I think, in the variety of content in the game, you actually have a lot of weapons to play with, and there's magic weapons too, although nowhere near as many as the strength or dexterity weapons that you'd be choosing from. The armor in this game is purely cosmetic, and I think that's something that they probably could have explained better to the player, because you get a lot of armor sets in the game, and you're expecting with, a stat sheet and more of that RPG style that your armor would matter, but it actually doesn't. It has no stats on it. It just has a name. It's purely aesthetic. And I think if they kind of found a way to make that clearer to the player, it would make it less confusing for people that would, put on armor and wonder what's going on and try to switch it out. But ultimately, it's just, you find a bunch of sets hidden in different areas, like the Metroidvania secrets. You put them on, and then whichever one you like best, you can switch to, but the armor is meaningless from that standpoint. Another thing I really enjoy about this game is they put a pretty heavy focus on parrying. So the way the parrying works, since your head is a black hole, you activate the parry, and then if you parry time it properly, the black hole will absorb and consume whatever attack was coming your way and would actually suck the essence out of anyone that attacked you. And if it was like the arm of a boss, or even like an arm like right here, if you parry that, it'll destroy the arm, because his whole thing is that he is called the end giver in the game. He consumes and destroys. But the cool part is that you get Ardor, which is a passive stat. You'll see in the top left once you unlock it in the game, and this gives you bonus experience. You can heal from it. You can actually gain heals from the parry as well. And there's actually some there's bosses and other very difficult enemies that you can parry for very satisfying moments. So I think in general they put a big focus on parrying. It looks cool. You zoom in, the black hole gets bigger. It feels good, and I think there's a lot of rewarding aspects in the combat and gameplay that, if you get good at the parrying, it plays well, which, I always enjoy that in these kind of games. So the ultimate question is, do I recommend the game or not? Should you buy it, or should you pass on it, or should you wait for sale? I would say that if Metroidvanias or Souls-likes are your main dig, right? Like you love any one of the, I hate calling it Souls-like because there's just so many of them now, but it's just kind of what people are used to. If that's your kind of game, and you have a little bit of patience for some bugs in the game, definitely get it. You're gonna have a great time. You can get anywhere from 12 to 20 hours out of this game. For the most part, it works well. It plays well. The aesthetics are awesome. The experience is really cool. The story fits the world, and there's some really fun moments and interesting characters. And the combat's satisfying and rewarding too. So I think if this is category number 1 for you, I would recommend picking it up. It's definitely worth it. But if you're on the fence about it, I think that they probably need maybe 1 or 2 live patches to kind of clean up some of the issues that kind of just function on that. So if you're kind of on the fence about it, or you're not sure, maybe wait for sale, or maybe just kind of wait and see if you can, if they end up patching it, updating it, because I think there's definitely some blockers that can be. And when you add, the every now and then an issue along top of a game that's meant to be difficult and challenging, where you're going to die a lot, I could see people that aren't glued to that kind of experience leaving early. So if this is something that you're kind of interested in but not really sure, this might be a pass for you. But that does it for this review here today. I really enjoyed this game. It's definitely a memorable game. The The combat was awesome. The visuals are cool. You see one of the characters right there. Super fun. I loved it. Yeah, it was really, really good. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.